Hello. Well, I suppose good evening from here, or in Afrikaans, we will say goeienaand allemaal. Good evening, everyone. And in this particular dialect of Afrikaans that I will like to present in a bit, we will say salam and goeienaand vir allemaal. Now, before we begin the talk, I think a bit of self-introduction. My name is Alex. I was born in Indonesia, grew up in South Africa. When I was a kid, we immigrated there. And the thing that I want to present is that naturally, the Cape Malay Afrikaans is a dialect of Afrikaans that is quite not well known, to be fair, because there's a lot of perceptions. And a lot of people are telling that, well, Afrikaans, like it's the language during the apartheid, could be impossible to have another thing. And it's quite a pity because truth is in South Africa, Afrikaans is spoken by a lot of people of different color, of different creed, and as such, I think it's quite fitting, especially now that it is the month of Ramadan that is celebrated not only by the Cape Malays but also by Muslims around the world. That a bit of introduction on this oft forgotten dialect of Afrikaans is quite appropriate for this time. So, without further ado, let's start with who are the Cape Malays or the Cape Muslims? So, the Cape Malays are descendants of the various people that were brought through the Dutch East Indies Company colonization, or the Dutch East Indies, also known by the Dutch name Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, known in South Africa as VOC or VOC, depending on your linguistic background, which colonized the area around the Cape Colony between the 17th to the 19th century, and they brought a lot of people from the east, what is now Indonesia, parts of Malaysia, parts of India, from Sri Lanka, and also in the eastern African coast, so what is now Tanzania, Madagascar, Mauritius, and these people were, they're quite a various bunch that was brought over by the Dutch. They were exiled people, exiled because they were rebelling against Dutch colonialism or simply not abiding by the rules of the Dutch. They were free men, traders, merchants, artisans attracted by promises or work opportunity by the Dutch, or even slaves. The Dutch brought a lot of slaves from what is now Indonesia and the East African coast to Cape Town to work in Cape Town to build the city from upgrown. And the descendants of these people married other people in the Cape Colony, whether they are indigenous Khoi and the San people, or the Bantus like Tosas and the Swanas, and other settlers, whether from Europe. Uh, Cape Town was a very cosmopolitan place. You got Dutch, Scandinavians, Protestant Hungarians, Protestant Poles, Germans, etc., or other Asians. But the thing is, the Malay term is not an ethnic marker. It does not denote that someone is an ethnic Malay as it is now in the modern time, but it refers to the Malay Creole languages that were spoken as the lingua franca amongst the people from what is now Indonesia and Malaysia that constitutes the majority of the people. And nowadays, the primary identifier of the community is Islam, the religion of the Cape Malays, amongst the wider colored community in Cape Town. And amongst the Cape Coloreds, so I guess I must explain a bit. In South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, and Zimbabwe, a colored person is a person of mixed racial heritage, whether they are of um, Black African, White European, South Asian, Southeast Asian, all of this mixed together and brought a new culture, and they subsequently became known as the colored people. Now, amongst the Cape colored people, there are the Cape Malay community, those that profess Islam and trace their roots to the various people that was brought by the Dutch. They were known as the Slums in Afrikaans, which means the Muslims, or the Malayers, which means Malays. And they are usually identified further by an Arabic or Islamic derived first name. So, for example, Imran, Muhammad, Shanib, Shakira, and the West European surnames, just like other Cape Coloreds. So you would have sometimes quite a unique combination. Imran, Peterson, Jufran, Paulsen, Islam, Christian, which of course exists, or sometimes really an Arabic or Malay derived last name. So you would have Shabir, Hamid, or Farouk, Makassar, but it's quite rare. So as you can see, these are some like the left picture is a family photo of an old Malay, Cape Malay, wedding in the 20s, if I believe, and the pictures like artists and also religious scholars. So the Cape Malays are quite a diverse group of people. Same with the Cape Coloureds in Cape Town. They came in all different sorts of color, eye shape, hair color, etc. Die eerste toelisang van Afrikaans was in Arabisch getoelis het. The first writing of Afrikaans was written in Arabic as a denote standard Afrikaans. So some of you might have known, I suppose that a lot of people have not known about this, but Afrikaans as a written language started its life not somewhere in the 1920s, but in the Cape Town madrasas, school institution, a boarding school for Muslim pupils in the 1830s. Why? The reason is because at that time religion was tied to the literacy system, and of course for Muslims learning an Arabic script was, it was mandatory if they were to pursue education in the religious field, and for the Dutch, which naturally also for the Christians and the Cape Colony, the Dutch language or Hoog-Hollands in Afrikaans was basically the language of the liturgy for the Protestant church, and hence why Afrikaans was not taught in schools but rather standard Dutch. So it was practical for the Cape Malays because in the 1815 the British took the Cape Colony over from the Dutch, and there was a succession of influx of people from the then Dutch East Indies. And subsequently, the Malay Creole languages in Cape Town was replaced gradually by a form of Dutch Creole that later influenced the Cape Dutch, the dialect of Dutch that was spoken in Cape Town, the Kaapse Hollands, and it would later become Afrikaans. Now, the thing with the Arabic Afrikaans, or Afrikaans written in Arabic script, it was mainly used as a medium of religious education. So to translate the Quran and the Hadiths, because it was written in Arabic, or to write religious prayers and poetry. And as such, it was never standardized because the madrasas themselves, they teach alternatively, firstly in Malay Creole languages, because it was a lingua franca amongst the banished Muslims running Cape Town, also in Arabic, because it's the holy language for the Muslims, and naturally in Afrikaans. Afterward, the Malay Creole languages, because most of the people that knows them died off, they were replaced by English. But Afrikaans persists, but nevertheless, it was never standardized in the madrasas, because every madrasas, they got their own standards. And there were at least 3 different kind of Arabic scripts that was used to write in the madrasas, to write Afrikaans. The first was Jawi, which is Malayo-Arabic, followed by Arabic script, as in the one that is used in the Quran, and a small minority in Nastaliq, the calligraphic form of Arabic script that is used mainly for poetry. The reason, most of the Muslims at that time were of Southeast Asian origin. So you got people of, from the Malayan Peninsula, and also from the Malays, also from Sumatra and Borneo, the Moluccans, Javanese, Buginese, including the Tuan Gurus. Tuan Gurus are a particular class of banished people. So they were not slaves. They were banished aristocrats or religious teachers that was banished by the Dutch from what is now Indonesia into Cape Town because they were rebelling against the Dutch. And the Tuan Gurus subsequently became some of the gurus, some of the teachers, the onderwijzer for the madrasas. Since the bulk of the ancestors of the Cape Muslims trace their roots to those from the Indonesian and Malaysian archipelago, the Malayo-Arabic script was chosen, and it's subsequently followed by South Asian Muslims. So you get Bengali, Tamil, Malabari, Malayali-speaking Muslims, and also Gujarati Muslims, and a small minority of East Africans, what is now Madagascar, Somalia, and the eastern coast, the eastern Swahili coast. Remember, the Dutch traded a lot with the sultanates that run the East African coast traded ivory, slaves, and gold, and then a smaller even minority from the Middle East and North Africa. Some of them are known as the Turks because a lot of the Middle East and North Africa fell under the Ottoman jurisdiction at the time, and hence why even when they are Kurds or Berbers, for example, they were known as Turks. But you also have Yemenis, Omanis. Remember, Oman used to run as very successful trading empire in the Indian Ocean, and also Egyptians. So if you know Arabic script, probably you could read this better, and I can assure you, you could read this much better than 98% of the all Afrikaans speaker population in this world. Because what are you reading right now is one of the first attested proof of Afrikaans and not Dutch as a written language, which ironically 77 to 78% of the whole population of Afrikaans speakers in the world cannot read this. So this is pretty much the transliteration, if you were to, to try to fit it into the Latin orthography. It will, yeah. So you would read this as hy gaan zijn best doen vir die koloniale se werkmissie, which corresponds in English to he's going to do his best for the colonial's work mission. This first mention of Arabic Afrikaans that was recorded was written by a worker, by a letter written by a worker of the British colonial administration to his family back in Cape Town, because the employee was posted somewhere in Grahamstown in the east. And this is interestingly way before Afrikaans was established by the South African government in 1925 as an official language. This was one of the first attested proof of Afrikaans, written not by Calvinist Afrikaners, but by a Cape Malay somewhere in the Cape Colony. I guess that's enough about history. Let's go forward to what is now. So this is the language distribution of Afrikaans in South Africa. As you can see, this green teal in the western part of South Africa. This is Afrikaans, as you can see as well in this blue part. But don't be mistaken. Most of these territories that in the census, it seems that there's a lot of people that speak Afrikaans, but in reality, most of the area under this green in the west is sparsely populated. There were deserts, shrubs, small cities. The bulk of the Afrikaans-speaking population lives in Cape Town, pretty much extending towards the Eastern Cape. Pretty much Western and Eastern Cape, and also here in Free State, where I grew up, and then also in Gauteng, or the former Transvaal province in the northeast of South Africa, particularly in cities like Pretoria, like in Joburg. Right. So Afrikaans is not a monolith, right? I wouldn't talk too much about the eastern part of Afrikaans, the eastern dialects of Afrikaans, because I think it's less relevant to this presentation. However, there are varieties in Free State and Bloemfontein. The commonly spoken Afrikaans dialect is what's the so-called Platteland Afrikaans, the flatland Afrikaans, which is kind of it's a kind of a misnomer, because Free State is not really low; it's rather quite high in the highlands, but it is rather flat. You also got the Oos-Transvaal, or the Oos-Transvaal gebied Afrikaans, which is this is basically the standard Afrikaans that was based on. But coming back to the western part of Southern Africa and also Namibia, because Afrikaans is also spoken in Namibia natively by a lot of people. You got three large dialects. First one is Namakwa Afrikaans, which is quite interesting because there's a lot of loanwords from Nama language, from the Nama language, the Khoekhoegwab languages. Also in German, for example, in Swakopmund, there are some German words being incorporated in the dialect. And then in the Northern Cape here, in the Orange Line, you got the Oranje Rivier Afrikaans, which also incorporates a lot of the Khoekhoegwab language, but also some other features as a reduplication. And then, of course, the center of the presentation is here. As you can see, the Cape Afrikaans dialect, or as we know in Afrikaans, Kops. And furthermore, on this small purple thing run in Kaapstad, in Cape Town, the Cape Malay or Cape Muslim Kops dialect, or as would be known, the Slumse Kops. So, what is Kops? Is in English, if you want to translate it, it's rather straightforward. So, what is Kops? So, due to the common history and the subsequent intermingling between the Muslim and the largely Christian population in the Cape Colony, the Cape Malay dialect of Afrikaans is subsumed under the general Kops or a Cape Afrikaans dialect that is commonly spoken now by the coloured population in Western Cape and its surroundings, also in the Eastern Cape, in PE, Port Elizabeth, for example. Now, nowadays, cops is seen as a manner of speak for the colored people, but this is rather an anachronism because previously cops were spoken by all people of different background in Cape Town. You see white immigrants, Asian immigrants, all of them speaking in cops when they learned Afrikaans because that was the dominant variety of Afrikaans that was spoken in the street. However, the National Party government, because remember again, the standard Afrikaans was based on the Afrikaans that was spoken in the eastern part of South Africa when the Afrikaners made the great trek, the Groot Trek, up north. They also brought their language, the Afrikaans, from what is now Eastern Cape, escaping from British imperialism, and hence why, according to the National Party, the party that ruled South Africa during the apartheid era, Kaapse Afrikaans was seen as something that is not really pure, per their words, and hence why most of the white inhabitants of Cape Town were, you know, they were encouraged to learn Standard Afrikaans. The children were encouraged to learn Standard Afrikaans instead of Kaps, which was seen as a low class dialect at that time. Now, enough of the history, I suppose. Let's move into some of the difference between Kaps, which also includes Cape Malay Kaps with Standard Afrikaans. So, some words with y beginning in Standard Afrikaans is pronounced as j in Kaps. As such, jy, which means you, would be in Kaps, it will be j. Julle, which is a plural you, it will be pronounced as jille. And jong, which is young or youngster, will be pronounced as jong in Kaps. And some of the stem words that start with ge or ga is pronounced as gie or gia. As such, geld, which means money or gold, and gang is geld and gyang in Kaps. And some of the words often undergoes palatization and even compounded. So hierdie, which means this in Afrikaans, is now hierdie. Vierdie, which means further, means in Kaps will be shifted into firi. Maak nie, which means make not, will be maki. And weet nie, which means know not, is now witi. And interestingly, some features from Dutch, remember Afrikaans stem from Middle Dutch, is still preserved in Kaps, even when it's not preserved in the standard Afrikaans. So, for example, ek is ik in Kaps. Sie, which means to say, in standard Afrikaans, is zeg. And nee is still pronounced like that. And nee as in Dutch is still pronounced like that in Kaps. But in standard Afrikaans, nee is pronounced as nee, which followed the standard Afrikaans orthography. So now the difference between slums and Kaps. Well, aside from the Malay words that are borrowed in standard Afrikaans or even Kaps, there's like some words in there. These are all borrowed from Malay. Afrikaans, the Cape Malay Afrikaans contain many Malay words that are not available in the other Afrikaans dialects, alongside with the even less common Arabic loanwords. Why? Because most of these words are related to day-to-day communication and religious matter, of which, most that's a typo there. Most non-Kaps speaker are not exposed to, since Islam is a minority religion in South Africa and Cape Town as well. And because of the nature of these words, this words, it's an intimate words that would use with family, with close members, with friends. Most of the Afrikaans speakers, even other Kap speakers, wouldn't encounter them. So for all other colors in Cape Town, they may not be even aware of these words being used in daily life because like their Muslim or their Cape Malay friends never use them amongst them. So right, pleasantries. If you want to say hello in standard Afrikaans, it will be quite similar. It will be hallo. But in slums and slums Kaps, you would say kanala, which is loaned from the Malay word kanalan, which means originally to introduce. However, make note that kanala is not only used by the Cape Muslims, but also permeates the religious line. It is also used by the general Cape colored population nowadays. So you would, if you go to Cape Town and you go on the street and you hear this like kanala my brucie, it doesn't mean that the speaker is a Cape Malay. It might be just like another like a non-Cape Malay guy because it's simply commonly used. However, the subsequent words are used still mainly by the Cape Malays. Salam. So, for example, if you was to speak Afrikaans, you would probably say goeiedag, which means good day. If you're a Cape Malay, you would probably just say, "Oh, salam, my bro. Good day, my brother." Thank you, which standard Afrikaans you would say donkey. In the Cape Malay community, they use two words even for this. The first one is derived from Malay, terima kasih, which is again pretty much straightforward from the original word, which is the terima kasih in Malay. And the second word is even more straightforward. It's pretty much shukran as it is in Arabic. Yeah, the last pleasantries that I could take note of. This is baie geluk, which means congratulations in Afrikaans. But in Cape Malay Afrikaans, they often use slamat, which is loaned from the Malay word salamat as well. So instead of saying baie geluk met jou verjaarsdag, you would say oh slamat met jou jarig, or baie geluk met jou prestasie. Good congratulations on your achievements. You would say oh slamat met jou prestasie, which means pretty the same, but in Cape Malay fashion. Now, unique words or Aussie woorde in Cape Malay Afrikaans. So these are the words, I guess. Like you could read this as well, but yeah, bagi yang berbahasa Melayu atau bahasa Indonesia, satu amaran, satu peringatan bahwa banyak kata-kata yang ada di dalam sini tidaklah diucapkan dengan lafal yang sama seperti dalam bahasa Melayu atau bahasa Indonesia, dan juga tidak semuanya ada diambil dari bahasa Melayu, karena banyak juga yang diambil dari bahasa lain di Asia Tenggara seperti bahasa Jawa atau bahasa Bugis seperti dukun atau jalang. En vir julle almal wat Afrikaans praat, ek dink dit is ook baie belangrik om te sien dat meeste van die woorde wat die Afrikaanssprekers het gebruik, het natuurlik het die stem van die Middelhollands, van dit natuurlik Middelhollands is die taal wat die Afrikaanse taal het gestem oor. Maar in Islamse Kaaps, die mense gebruik ook die Malays en die Arabiese woorde, maar hulle gebruik dit alleen vir die religieuse natuur en nie vir die algemene gebruik van die woorde. Die algemene woorde bly stil met die algemene standaarde Afrikaanse woorde of die algemene Kaapse woorde. And yeah, so it's actually quite interesting as well to notice some of the constructions alone. And again, if you speak Malay or Indonesian, pengucapan huruf G di dalam bahasa Afrikaans bukanlah dengan G keras atau G keras, tapi dengan G, dengan sebuah suara yang dibuat tenggorokan. Jadi perkataan yang dimulai dari huruf G seperti khilat dibaca dengan huruf G ini, bukan dengan huruf G. Jadi bukan gilat tapi khilat, atau bukan gamil tapi khamil. So yeah, it's rather interesting to notice. If you notice a trend from most of the loanwords in there, as I've said before, these words are all related to intimate things that are usually shared only with, families, close members, religious, personal hygiene, our daily lives, eating together with other people, our natural occurrences, stuff that are commonly kept, and it's a testament of the rich history of the Cape Malays and of South Africa in general, of course. And it's very interesting for me as a Malay/Indonesian speaker to notice a lot of these words, because this is pretty much it's like founding something else that existed in vacuum for like more than 200 years, and then suddenly realizing that it still appears, yet it's still hidden, because in the popular media you wouldn't hear this thing. Like you wouldn't notice the words, because in daily Afrikaans, as you can see in the standard Afrikaans, the words are definitely not the same, and yet the Cape Malay Afrikaans preserves a lot of these words that trace the roots as well to the other languages that I speak. And of course, very interestingly, in Cape Malay Afrikaans, they have new construction of the words as well. So interestingly, for example, the first one is died. In standard Afrikaans, you would say just gestef. But in Cape Malay Afrikaans, you would say gamaningal, which is formed from the Afrikaans verb gaan, which means to go or to do, and the Malay word maningal, which means to die. So as you can see, I bolded the Cape Malay Afrikaans specific words, and that's with the CM and the SA, the standard Afrikaans, and then the English translation. And you can see most of these particular Cape Malay words are loaned from Arabic. Usi is from, I believe it's loaned from Arabic. Khamaningal is a compound of Afrikaans and Malay. Oval, the beginning, it's loaned from Arabic through Malay as well. And Pwasa is the Malay word to fast. So it's very interesting to see like this kind of words that still say the same. Now, second example is again a contraction of the Gaan word. Gaan is a very useful word in Afrikaans, by the way. You can use a lot of things with Gaan. Um, in this example, you would see Gamaaf, which is formed from the Afrikaans word Gaan and the Malay word Maaf, which is forgiveness. So Gamaaf in Afrikaans, so in Cape Malay Afrikaans is asking for forgiveness, which is standard Afrikaans. It's like om vergifnis te vra or just forgiveness vra. And as you can see here, Cape Malay Afrikaans, which is also common with the Cape Afrikaans with Kops, still preserves the ik instead of ek. Labarang, which is loaned from Javanese, is used instead of eight, or the antiquated suikervies for eight. Tuan, which is loaned from Malay, is used in place of the standard meneer or mister in Dutch or Afrikaans. Gamaaf in place of vergifnis vra. And ajal, which is again an Arabic word for that. The next one is Sumbayan tapait, prayer rug, which is in standard Afrikaans is a gebedstapait of or a gebedskleed, and it's formed from Malay word sembayang, which means to worship, and Afrikaans tapait, which is a rug or a carpet. So in this example, genief hou die Sumbayan tapait uit van die kaas vir Ami sodat hy sy salag kan doen. As you can see, the difference is in here. This is familial term. Ami is just loaned from Arabic, and Salah is naturally the act, the prayer, the form of prayer when you pray in Islam, is to perform a Salah. Yeah, and the last example is quite interesting as well. A slambleerman, which is a halal butcher, which in standard Afrikaans is simply a halal slagger, and is formed from the Malay word simbali, which means to slaughter, and the Afrikaans word man, which is a person. Vir Afrikaans sprekers, ek moet sê dat slambleerman, as jy gaan na Kapstad toe, as jy gaan met 'n slamse gesin en jy hoor slambleerman, 'n slambleerman beteken alleen is 'n slagter wat kan die halal kode volg, en dit ook impliseer dat die slagger is ook van die moslime van die Malayse gemeenskap en nie ja, 'n gewone slagger nie. So as jy hoor 'n slambleerman in 'n besprek met die Kaps met 'n slamse met 'n Malayer Kaapse, dit beteken nie alleen die gewoonlike slagger, maar tog die presiese natuur van 'n slambleerman. Die slagger van die gemeenskap wat weet van die islamitiese reg en alles van die ritus wat sy moet volg. So as you can see here, yeah, there's a couple of differences as well. Umi is, of course, the Arabic word from mother that was loaned by the Cape Malay community. Haki instead of maalvleis, the standard Afrikaans word. Slambleerman, which is yeah, in place of the halal slagger. Denningvleis, which is accepted in both standard Afrikaans and this variety. It's just a particular Cape Malay dish. Originally the Javanese dendeng, and then after 200 or 300 years of evolution in the Cape Town, it resembles something else. And buka is in Malay, this is originally to open, but buka in Cape Malay Afrikaans simply means to break the fast of the fasting during Ramadan. So yeah, hoekom baie mense weet nie van slams nie? Why don't many people know about Cape Malay Afrikaans? Well, the first reason is that the Cape Malays are minority inside a minority population without a strong popular representation in media, both in Afrikaans-speaking media and naturally also in English-speaking media. And Afrikaans during the early National Party era, the Nasionale Party, in the late 1940s, was seen as the language of the Calvinist white Afrikaners. The Cape Malay Afrikaans was seen as an afwyk, aberration, and even as onsuiver, impure. A big irony, actually, if you consider the history of Afrikaans started in Cape Town. When when they compared it to Standard Afrikaans, it was based on the dialect of the people that moved from the Cape Colony all the way to the eastern part of the country. Het, I mean, for me personally, persoonlijk, ik voel dit is groot ironie. Naturally, the attitude changed a bit later on with acknowledgement of Malay in the Tall Monument. Yet after apartheid, the stigma of Afrikaans as a kind of a the taal van die baas, the language of the master still persists. This is especially more prevalent in the eastern part of South Africa, where most of the Afrikaans speakers were white South Africans, and you would rarely get into contact with non-whites that speak Afrikaans as their first language. This is not really persistent, for example, in the western part of the country. And the last one is the slums. The Cape Malay Afrikaans is being abandoned as most young Cape Malays have stopped acquiring it in favor of the general Cape, like the Cape Afrikaans opposite dialect due to multiple factors, intermarriage, for example, and also not knowing simply the words. Remember, slums is a sub dialect of Kops, right? So a lot of the words in slums has their own equivalent in Kops, and if you intermarry with a non-Muslim, you would simply not use the word and you wouldn't taught it to your children. So the younger generation simply don't know the word that was used by the uncles, by the grandfathers, by the ancestors, because nobody teach them anymore. But however, now everything is glum because after apartheid, a lot of art and musical performances started to rise in Cape Town, done by the Cape Colored community and particularly also amongst the Cape Malays. So you have all traditions such as the lead keys, the song performances done by choirs, which competed with other choirs in other neighborhood or the association during New Year, for example, and it mushroomed, and some of them even perform abroad. And yeah, so lately, yeah, I guess we know in online. If you're if you're interested in viewing a work in slums, try to watch Barakat, which is a Cape Malay work. It's a film. If I remember correctly, it was released in 2020. It's the first box office film in South Africa that featured slums as its main language. So not only cops, because there has been movies with cops as the main language, but slums, yo, this is a new thing, eh? And yeah, if you're into hip hop music, Young Stassi PT is a Cape Malay artist that sings in English, but he often slips cops and especially slums quite often in his lyrics. So if you want to take a sneak peek, because some of his songs also works with his own hi- family history, especially because like the grandfather that is here in the slide, like he was one of the gurus in the madrasas during the 50s when the apartheid was codified. So yeah, um, give him a try if you want to hear a bit of the slang being used. Anyway, baie terima kasih, baie dankie, terima kasih banyak. Thanks a lot for listening to me, and yeah, I would be very happy to try to answer any questions that you may have. If you have any question in Afrikaans or in Malay/Indonesian, feel free to put that as well. I will try to answer as I could. I see that we already have a few of the questions, so let me just read. Baie dankie vir die presentasie. Will speaker of standard Afrikaans and COPs be able to roughly understand each other? Yes and no. It really generally yes, but you usually need to get a tweak on how do you understand it. I was I grew up listening to standard Afrikaans and I could understand cops sort of after getting exposed, but that was also because one of my friend is a colored guy that moved from George in Western Cape to to Bloemfontein, and I picked up cops up from him. But in general, yes, but you would really need to help because it's pretty much a one way, right? Because if you speak cops, you would understand standard Afrikaans because you know most of the popular media of Afrikaans is based on standard Afrikaans. So yes, if you speak a standard Afrikaans to someone that speaks cops, of course the person will understands that. But if someone speaks cops to someone that only knows standard Afrikaans, now that's a difference because a lot of people they simply don't know they're not exposed to cops, right? So yeah, I guess the answer is yes, but with the caveat that the speaker of standard Afrikaans really need to get used to cops. Right. So I hope that answers the question. Let me know if not. I will try to elaborate more. Um, is there a difference in the music that the different dialects listen to? I suppose the different Afrikaans dialects listen to. Well, to answer the question, most of the Afrikaans music is, it's based on standard Afrikaans, but I've seen a lot of my friends who speak standard Afrikaans. They're white, even to boot, and they also listen to cops. But especially, yeah, I would think if you speak standard Afrikaans or you speak, I don't know, like a Namakwa Afrikaans, yeah, you will definitely listen to cops, but you wouldn't like dig them like you know s- that into much about it, because the thing is like most of the music that was released in cops, for example, it's released mainly targeted to young generation, right? So you got hip hop or pop, and these things may not appeal to the older generation, which apparently form the bulk of the Afrikaans music market for some reason. So yes and no. Again, it depends on like the flavor. Yeah, I would be tempted to say yes, but then again, I know a lot of people who wouldn't like to hear cops calling it like a rough language and sort. So yeah, it depends. Are there still okay? Third question: are there still social or cultural prejudices toward Cape Malay Afrikaans or the speakers compared to standard Afrikaans? Yes, unfortunately, yeah. Because the thing is like during apartheid there was this well, before apartheid even, there was this stigma that if you speak Cops is seen as unsuiver because there's like a lot of loan words of non-Dutch origin. Because you know when the people in the 1920s, the geachte here, the honorable um, linguist of want to codify Afrikaans as a standard language, they try to purge Afrikaans from many of the onzuiverheid, impurities that was there. Mostly, of course, English loanwords. They want to create new words, which is interesting, of course. But also on the way, there is also this kind of hostility against anything that represents a deviation of the, I guess, mainstream Afrikaans, Afrikaner culture at the time, which is based on mostly in the eastern part of the country. So yes, there is still prejudice. Cop speakers are seen as a bit of uneducated, rough. I mean, on the uneducated, it's kind of hard when you try to call them uneducated when basically the education was not equal for like tens of you know hundreds of years in South Africa. It was never geared toward the speakers of the Cops, and especially toward the Cape Malay Afrikaans, because remember during the Dutch colonization of the Cape Town, if you want to be a burger, a citizen, you need to be not only a Christian, you need to be a Protestant Christian. So if you're a Catholic or an Orthodox, you cannot be a burger, a citizen of the Cape Colony. And hence why a lot of the Muslims are simply disempowered because, they're not even Christian. So they were not given the right to obtain education. It was only after the British arrived that they were granted education. And hence why there is the prejudice that if you speak Cops, I'm not even talking about Cape Malay Afrikaans, about Cops, there is a prejudice that you are seen as a low class, bit more uneducated, etc. But yeah, it's not really prevalent for the younger generation. It's mostly about the older people, I suppose. All right. Fourth question: is it common for younger people in the Cape Malay or colored community to shift to English as their primary language as opposed to Cops or Standard Afrikaans? Um. Well, yes, I suppose, but here's the thing: cops is a dynamic thing, right? So a lot of English words enter cops, and people in Cape Town and its township code switch between cops and English like that. So rather than shifting completely to English, I would say there is more and more Anglicism instead of cops, because rather than having the Tall Commissie, the language commission running, in COPs, people usually are more, I wouldn't say pliable, but they are more open for new words, especially if it's seen as chic or cool. And so, yeah, there's like a lot of new influx. But I wouldn't say there's a shifting to English as an adopting English as a home language, because Kaps is seen as the taal van die familie, like the language of of the family, right? So more Anglicism that I notice, yeah, but shifting to English in general, I wouldn't say so. Fifth question: which script is usually used to write cops? Well, 200 years ago, it would be Arabic script, but ever since the last 100, I don't know, 30, 120 years. Oh, wait, cops, yes, Latin. Latin alphabet, that's pretty much, sorry, I thought I was slums of cops, because slums of cops was written in the Arabic script, but cops in general, when when it was codified, because cops was never codified, right? Afrikaans was codified in 1925, but yeah, in the Latin alphabet. But yeah, everything is in Latin alphabet practically when it comes to cops. Which what percent of Afrikaans vocabulary is from Malay? I have no idea. To be fair, there are words from Malay, because obviously the Dutch East Indies Company imported, well, imported is such a poor choice of word, I suppose. Brought a lot of people from the Malay speaking archipelago. Malay was the lingua franca and was used by a lot of words. Bayer, for example, which came from the Malay word banyak, and it's used every day. You go all the from northern Namibia to the border with Mozambique. People say Bayer. People say this, like these words with no problem. But I don't know like the exact percentage, unfortunately. Okay, so last question that I have here: are there any words of Malay or Indonesian or Arabic origin that entered Standard Afrikaans to Cape Malay? I wouldn't dare to answer this question, because I'm not a linguist by by education, so I wouldn't know whether they entered Standard Afrikaans, which was codified somewhere outside of the outside of Cape Town, outside of Cape Colony. I wouldn't know if they entered it directly through the intercession of the Cape Malay community in the subsequent split between the, in 1830s, when the Afrikaners committed the Great Trek all the way from the Cape Colony to the interior of South Africa. I have no academic knowledge to answer that question, but safe to say, at least on the one word that I know, that will be Kanala, which I've already explained before, which is to say hello. That word entered the vocabulary of Standard Afrikaans lately, because, believe it or not, because of hip hop. Basically, a lot of the hip hop listeners listen to the way the Cape Malay speaks, but by performers that use cops and when they're performing, and then Kanala entered the popular vocabulary amongst many of the standard Afrikaans speakers, even. Okay, so last question. Hello, can you recommend me some methods to learn Afrikaans? Thanks. Oh, that's interesting. I learned Afrikaans at school, so I there are some websites that you could use definitely. I mean, like the partner of this gathering, for example, you could use them. There are various methods. There are free websites even, or like other books. But I would say probably use that in conjunction with finding Afrikaans speakers through platforms like social platforms like this one, as for example, finding people that want to exchange languages or simply are willing to be your tutor. Aside from, of course, immersion to go to South Africa, there are a couple of YouTubers. I guess you can like run the course research on YouTube that teaches Afrikaans. So yeah, I would definitely recommend to start from that. There's also this website called Easy Afrikaans that will be a start, I suppose, that you could use. So yeah, just do that, and then afterward, yeah, read up and get in touch with Afrikaans speakers. That should be it. Um, I suppose, yeah. Again, I learned Afrikaans through schools and through immersion with my friends. So I cannot suggest something when because I'm not in South Africa anymore at the moment, right? But that will be the previous one that I mentioned. I suppose that's off of my brain. That will be the first one that I would recommend to you to learn Afrikaans. Okay, so Yeah. If there are no more questions for me, again, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk. And I would be very happy to meet you guys after this talk. If you want to hit me up, if you want to ask me something, if you want, for example, to ask for sources that I use, I would definitely send them to you. I would recommend, for example, for you to, if you're interested further in the Cape Malay Afrikaans, to read up on Ahmad Davi's work on the Cape Muslim Afrikaans. It's one of the more informative book that I've managed to get in order to research for my short presentation in there. Other than that, well, I bid you guys all a nice morning, day, or evening, wherever you are. And yeah, tot ziens. That's in Afrikaans. It means see you somewhere in the gathering.